Hi everyone, it's Miss Kelley here. Happy Friday. Sorry that I wasn't able to be here today, but I do want to go ahead and start the next chapter. The next chapter is on cells. So hopefully you picked up the 4 papers on the lab table, and I'm going to go ahead and give you a minute to fill in your table of contents. So if the substitute would go ahead and pause this video now so everybody can update their table of contents. Alright, so we're going to divide this long section of notes into 2 sections. So this first section is the notes on cell theory. So everybody should find their paper. It was a packet, and in the very first page it says Notes Cell Theory. We'll go ahead and look at that. Today, basically what we want to go over are, why is a cell the basic unit of life? What does it have that makes it a living thing all by itself? And so if you look at your paper, it says, what do I need to know? What are the 3 parts to the cell theory? Compare a prokaryote and a eukaryote, and be able to list the levels of organization in order and give examples. So those are the types of questions that I'm going to be asking you on the test. So let's go ahead and do cell theory first. In cell theory, number 1, all living things are made of cells. And we talked about this before when we talked about the 8 characteristics of life. Number 2, cells are the basic unit of function and structure in living things. Alright, and so what that means is when we look at organisms that have multiple cells, so multicellular organisms, those cells are specialized. So for example, if we have muscle cells over here, those muscle cells have the ability to create a lot of energy, okay? And they make up the muscle. Your blood is made of cells, and they are specialized to carry oxygen. Over here are nerve cells. So nerves are made of cells, and they send signals. So every living organism is made of cells, and that specialized tissue, if it has it, is also made of cells. The third part of the cell theory is new cells are made from pre-existing cells. And what they used to think is there was something called spontaneous generation. When a couple hundred years ago, when they would leave meat out and flies would fly around it, and then a few days later maggots would develop on the meat, they were like, oh, maggots are just appearing. Well, somebody did an experiment, and they took a piece of meat and left it out, and then they took a piece of meat and they put it in a screen structure, and what they found was that the meat that was uncovered developed maggots, and the meat that was covered never developed the maggots. So that helped them realize that life comes from pre-existing life, and cells come from pre-existing cells. So those are the 3 parts of the cell theory. You have to know those. Okay? The next objective we're looking at is being able to compare a prokaryote and eukaryote. And on your notes, you have a table to compare them. So I'll go ahead and show you the notes for prokaryotes. We'll pause the video, and then I'll explain them after you're done writing. Alright, so prokaryotes, or prokaryotic cells, they don't have a nucleus. And so if you remember from middle school, the nucleus is where the DNA is stored. But since prokaryotes don't have a nucleus, their DNA just floats around the cell. Okay? It's smaller and simpler than eukaryotic cells, which is what we're comparing it to. And the only prokaryotic cells are bacteria, so that's the kingdom that they come from. Every other organism is a eukaryote, and they have nuclei. This is a picture, or cartoon, of a prokaryote. And what I want you to notice, it has a cell wall and a cell membrane, and then this stringy spaghetti-like stuff, that's DNA. They call it a nucleoid, but not a nucleus. So there's no capsule around that DNA to keep it enclosed. It's like if you had your backpack full of stuff in your car. Well, let's say you forgot your backpack, so you just put your books in the car, and you turned the corner and everything got all over the place. Your DNA is just floating all over a prokaryotic cell if you're a bacteria. Here's another bacteria, and you can see that the DNA is floating around again. It doesn't have a capsule around its DNA. Eukaryotic cells are more complicated, and that's what the majority of organisms are made of. So if we go ahead and pause this now, and then after you're done writing, I'll talk about eukaryotes. Eukaryotes, or eukaryotic cells, they have a nucleus. And so the nucleus is where that DNA is stored. So it's like a suitcase to put all the DNA. Eukaryotes are larger and more complex than prokaryotic cells. One of the ways that we think that eukaryotic cells evolved is actually some of the parts inside them, which are called organelles. They used to be prokaryotes, so they used to be bacteria. And then one prokaryote ate another, and instead of digesting that prokaryote, it kept it and formed a symbiotic relationship that benefited it, and then that relationship was maintained. So that's what they think happened with the mitochondrion. The mitochondrion, it actually has its own DNA. So they think the mitochondrion was probably its own prokaryote, and somewhere along the way, one bacteria ate another bacteria, the mitochondria, and decided to incorporate it into its being, and that's how cells have become dependent on mitochondria. So like I said previously, every other kingdom but bacteria are going to be eukaryotes. So fungi, protists, animals, and plants are eukaryotic cells. So here's a picture of a eukaryote, and you'll notice that the eukaryote looks a lot more complicated than a prokaryote, and that's because it is. It has a lot more structures inside its cell, and those structures help it become more specialized and more functional, almost like a factory. This is an animal cell. A lot of times animal cells are more circular than plant cells, and you can see that they have lots of organelles. A plant cell does also, but sometimes their cell shape is more square. They also have organelles called chloroplasts, which are responsible for photosynthesis. And you notice they're more of a boxy structure because they have a cell wall. So animal and plant cells are different because they have different functions. So comparing them both, there are some similarities. The plasma membrane is the same. They have cytoplasm. They both have DNA. They both have ribosomes. But again, the main difference is prokaryotes, no. Prokaryotes do not have a nucleus. You do. Eukaryotes do have a nucleus. So no nucleus, you do have a nucleus. Then the last thing we'll talk about is levels of organization. So I'll go ahead and please pause the video again, and then we'll talk. So organelles are the smaller parts that are inside the cell, and each of them has a particular function, like a part in a factory. You might have your assembly line in your factory, the people who box up the product. You have the boss who runs everything, and so does your cell. A cell is a group of functioning organelles. A tissue is made of cells. So you think about your skin tissue, or even pieces of your liver, pieces of your tongue, whatever. You have different pieces of tissue. When you put all that tissue together, you end up with an organ. Organ systems are organs that have a similar function. So your esophagus, your stomach, your small and large intestine, those would be part of your digestive system. Just like your heart and your blood vessels, the arteries and veins, those are part of your circulatory system. And then when you put all the organ systems together, of course, you get an organism. So this is just a diagram again. Of course, you start out with your organelles right here. This is the mitochondria. You put those together, so you have a cell, and those cells become tissue. So that could be your skin tissue or epithelial tissue that makes up your stomach lining. That stomach lining all together makes up a stomach. Then the stomach and the rest of the organs make up your digestive system, and then all the systems actually make up an organism. So that's the third thing that you have to be able to tell me, is what are the levels of organization in order. So, and again, they kind of fit inside each other. Organelles are in cells, cells are in organs, cells are in tissues, Tissues are in organs, organs make up organ systems, and organ systems make up organisms. Okay? All right, so we're going to stop right there, and then we're going to watch another video on cell structure and function.